Millie, it really is such a pleasure for me to share space with you on this occasion. Your film has often been described as mesmerizing, emotionally rich, artful, inventive. The list goes on, and it is all of those things and so much more. From a personal perspective, for me, it is deeply moving, and there are parallels between your life and mine. Both born in the early '80s, both born in the homeland context. In my case, I was born in Botswana, actually, even
Oh,
though my family's from originally from the Eastern Cape. By the time the homelands were coming up, my father had already moved that side for a job, and so we landed up there. So by the time I was born, that's where we were living.
wow.
Yeah, and so I grow up there and immediately go to white schools as soon as I'm old enough to go to a proper school, and that begins at around the age of 6 or 7. And so we are among those that early generation of Black people that entered into white spaces.
Yeah,
It's such a crucial time in our country's history. It's such a fragile time. And I think that people like us tended to find each other later in life. I mean, we found each other at university.
yeah.
um, and I think it speaks to one of the reasons why this film resonates so strongly for me is because it's a story that isn't really told, not from the perspective of Black women and not from that first person narrative that you
Yeah.
adopt in this film, which is really moving. You bring to it poetry and prose that is intimate and personal and powerful. And I think, firstly, I just want to thank you for this film and for treating this topic with a sense of importance, but also with the delicacy that it deserves. And it brings such poignance to a piece of my own life that
Mm.
I've never seen reflected in this way. So thank you. Let me start with that.
Thank you for all of that. Thank you. This
Mm,
I made it for us, Lindy. I made
mm,
it for us because um you're right, like it was a story that I just was not seeing reflected at
mm,
all. And but the story was so ubiquitous. We are so ubiquitous. We are everywhere. These experiences were I didn't have to scratch hard when I was asking my friends some of the questions of our experiences as the first generation, like en masse, of kids who were integrated into white schools. It didn't take a lot for me to elicit very, very strong responses from my peers when I asked them very basic questions about those early years of apartheid thawing out and us as people. Um, the word reconciliation is so complicated.
mm,
Um, but there was, as much as, there's the big reconciliation with a capital R that was done at the political level, um, the cultural level reconciliation of us coming together for the first time and touching each other's hair,
mm,
and bonding and sitting next to each other and smelling each other
mm,
and pronouncing each other's names as Black people and white people and Indian people and colored people, etc., for the first time as children,
mm.
under this massive umbrella leadership of the Mandelas, the Tutus of the world, and those leaders who felt like it felt held. I felt held as a child. I felt loved by the leaders. I felt loved by whatever this machine that was transforming from apartheid into this new country. I felt very loved. I felt like the grown-ups have got it.
Mm.
And so we can do this process. And while that process was beautiful in many ways, it was also very painful because the burden of having to humanize white people and white South
Mm.
Africans was on us as kids, actually, because a
Mm.
lot of the times that racism happened, it happened in one direction. It was always from
Yeah.
white people to brown, Black Indian kids. And so we took those blows as kids, and we didn't have the language at the time because we were young. And the
Mhm.
country was telling us everything is okay. Simunye, we are one.
Mm.
We're
Mm.
uniting.
Mhm.
Um,
Mm.
and so those kind of wounds, I felt like they were, very small cuts because it was never hectic racism. It was kind of always suggestive. And by the time we grew up, we were covered in them, but we'd never spoken about them.
Mm.
And so I was like, I do think that this particular generation has to say something about our very unique experience that the Gen Zs don't know and the Born Frees don't necessarily know and our parents don't know.
And as you're speaking now, I immediately think to myself about some of the scenes where that really depict that sense of a burden that we had to carry as those first Black children in these schools. And you depict it in these scenes where Black children are being interviewed by white journalists, and there is an almost a cruelty in their line of questioning, this pushing this agenda of reminding this Black child. There's almost a moment in which the Black child is allowed to be just a child starting a new school,
Yeah.
going through a lovely experience of being slightly nervous and very excited. But essentially, they're reminded that they're the Black child entering a white space. They have to be Black first and aware of their Blackness as they enter this white space. And in the end, it's almost enforcing or reinforcing a sense of fear in these Black children. At some point, there's a child with tears in his eyes as this white journalist continues to ask, so why don't they like you? Like, why do white people not like Black people? And that line of questioning is very cruel, but I think it also points to the way in which, I don't know, is it this young person not allowed to just be a child? That wherever we went in these spaces, we had to carry our Blackness first. I don't know if that resonates with you in a way.
Well, that's the thing. Part of that interview, those kids were in a school in Soweto. And I think the interview was trying to articulate exactly what you're saying, which is that these are kids. They want to be doctors. They want to be teachers. They want to be
Mm,
lawyers. They have these, desires like all children do of something that they want to do when they grow up. But they have this burden of also knowing that they are Black. In
mm,
1990, at age 10, they already know that they can't articulate exactly what apartheid
mm,
is politically, but they say one of the little girls is like, she says something about the white people don't want us to have our human rights. At
mm,
10 years old, she
mm,
already knows that. And the one with
mm.
tears in his eyes, um,
Monde, I think.
Monde,
Mm,
he somehow has this very deep knowing of this
mm,
hatred. And he says,
mm,
the problem is that it's not with us, it's with them. They think they're
mm,
better than us. So
mm,
that knowing is very, very deep. And I feel like we also knew at some level, even if it might not have been, cerebral or, intellectually formed these opinions, but at some level you knew that you were entering into a space where you had to posture as lesser than.
mm,
And so the burden of having to explain apartheid, the burden of having to hold the realities and the meanings of it are always on Black people. And white people get to almost, we are the ones that have to almost teach or show or make them understand
yeah.
what this is like. And this is why in film 4, the conversation is not me and you and my other friends talking about all of our pain. I feel like that pain has been well documented and it will continue to be well documented. That's why in film 4, I'm talking to my white friends because I'm saying, when we talk about race and when we talk about our Blackness and our identity and all these experiences, where are you guys? What are
Mm,
you thinking? Because this affected both of us. This is a two-ended stick. On one end,
mm,
it's Black pain. On the other, what's happening there? And I'm asking, is there such a thing as white pain that maintains this blindness to, or this willful, or I don't know, I'm not sure where it is in the white imagination, but the apartheid happens one directionally, mostly the power dynamics, and most
mm,
of the time racism is recorded around the world. It usually happens from one direction to
mm,
people who are usually Black or brown or indigenous. And why is it that whenever we have to explain apartheid, it must be us that are talking about our pain, as if
mm,
we've caused the pain ourselves, as if we are the ones that are shooting ourselves or excluding ourselves from certain opportunities
mm,
or redesigning cities and saying,
mm.
okay, we're going to live in the bad place and you guys are going to live in the good place. What's happening with our peers when we're talking about this? That's why I wanted to turn the gaze back on my white friends, not
Mhm,
necessarily to interrogate, but to say, if we're going to get to the bottom of this, I believe that there is such a thing as white pain,
mhm,
and it manifests itself over and over through various generations as this need to segregate, as this need to not actually face the history. And I don't feel like there's a precedence that white South Africans
mm,
have culturally, politically, to really face themselves. You know, Mandela freed all of us, and the ANC in 1994, and the way that our democracy happened at the time, all South Africans actually decided. I mean, there were those factions and who didn't want to be part of it. That's fine, but we wouldn't have had the country we have if most people didn't agree.
Mm, mm, mm,
Um, and I feel like, again, the burden of explaining and holding and being the face of apartheid has been on us. And I'm like, no, actually, the what was happening in white society, what's happening in white homes, what's happening in white families, that this thing persists.
mm,
And so I'm more interested in actually what they're thinking
mm,
as the source of the
mm.
thing that keeps harming others and themselves, and separating them from their own sense of a larger, more free humanity. Um, yeah.
And you know that part, that film four. I mean, I think it is really a key moment in the film. The very difficult conversation that you have with your producer Marion. I'm curious how that became part of the film, but also how you chose to treat it. In that, in the end, it's audio only. We never see Marion expressing these words. It's very powerful in the way that it's done. Perhaps you can just talk about the filmmaking decisions behind all of that.
hmm So I always knew that it was going to be part of the film. I just didn't know how. I always knew that I wanted to represent on film the feeling that I, as a kid born in the 80s, who went to white schools, who befriended and had many relationships with white people throughout my life, that even though these relationships had were guardrailed by a sense of equality and a shared freedom, and we do want to be friends, we do want to get to know each other, and there is some kind of love between us, there is some kind of trust between us, we do have a friendship. However, within these friendships, within intimate spaces, the power dynamics of our histories play themselves out in very subtle ways. There is still there was still a murkiness. There was still a sense of fear, actually, of if I upset my white friend, what's going to happen? Because before, there have been relationships in the past where the minute I show up as black, people get
Mm,
uncomfortable and then, you know, people get blue ticked and then the friendship kind of doesn't carry on anymore. Or, you know, there have been experiences in university where your friends and then suddenly now things get sexual sometimes and then there's like a weird denialism that happens within that. There was
mm,
just there were many weird things that were happening that I felt like, why are we not talking about this other dynamic between us?
mm,
And I was
mm,
really intentional about, I want to represent this thing, because mostly when we talk about apartheid and mostly when we talk about racism, we kind of talk about these very violent kind
mm,
of these things that happen on the street where it's the police versus people and dogs and water cannons. And so people think that that's racism. But I had never experienced that. I'd never been chased by a dog. I don't know anything about tanks and tear gas. And yet in these relationships, psychologically, there are certain feelings, emotions, there's stuff happening. And I wanted to
mm,
explore that space that is unspoken, that space that I feel also doesn't have a language yet, where there are vestiges of the past within our relationships, even though we like each other. And I know that my white friends also have feelings about what happens when they upset me as a black person, what happens when we
mm,
bring race into the room. And so we both agreed with Marion that we do want to explore this. How we're going to do that was a mystery. And so there were times when I would film her, and I would ask her to film me while we're talking about these things. And how we eventually arrived at the treatment of it with the black screen was partly accidental. We lost some of the footage that we were using that I'd already filmed, and I was like, "Damn!" The audio was kept, but the footage was, some of it was lost, not all of it. But in listening to the footage that had been saved, when I was watching, I could feel myself get angry
mm,
at my friend. I could feel myself get defensive as a black person, being like,
mm,
I don't want you to hear these things. And so I felt myself not listening to her. I felt myself becoming more, enraged. And I was like, the audience is most likely going to feel what I'm feeling.
mm,
Secondly, she was a producer. She was like, I don't want to be in front of the camera. I'm not, I want to be behind the camera and I'm a little uncomfortable. And so I was like, okay, then maybe if we do the black screens, this might, if we bring your image in every now and then, but we actually keep the audio, maybe this might be an interesting way. And I felt better when it was just, when I was just listening, because I felt like I'm listening to a person that I know, but something in the lack of imagery is allowing me to hear her. And at the same time, when it came to Bettina, some of the things that she was saying for me felt like a confession. In fact, both of them. And so the black space started to function like a confessional that allowed them to say the things that were very, very difficult to say and me to hear them. And the black space also allowed for me to, it was also a proxy for my own sense of shame, actually, about the ways I felt afraid of my white friend and white people, because we don't ever talk about the fear. A lot of the times we're always fighting. We're always in the struggle, and we're strong and we're bold and we're invulnerable and we are, I know my rights. And I'm like, actually, most people did not fight against apartheid because they were afraid. And they have very good reason to be afraid, because the state was violent. And a white person could say, you stole this, and you lose your job and you lose your resources and you lose your home. And so I wanted to tap into that fear to say, I'm not crazy for being afraid. I've got good reasons. But I also have a sense of shame because we're all out here wearing our headbands and our ruby woo and reading our books, and we are the feminists. But I'm like, that side of like the, isn't represented. So the black also protected and became a space for me to engage my own vulnerability as a black person. And so it was done to kind of speak to all of these different concerns of like representing my own image, representing the images of my friends as people. But also what would happen was that I felt like sometimes when white people watch other white people talking about race, they want to take a license to distantiate and to say, oh, that's just her problem. That's not me. I'm fine. I'm not racist. I don't have any racist feelings or emotions, but that's her problem. And so the black also represented an opportunity for white viewers to also listen, actually, and not project their feelings and their denialism onto Marian or Bettina, but to take that space and to use it as I'm going to be forced to listen, and to use that discomfort as a way to encounter and engage with maybe a very, very repressed pain, a very repressed feelings of anger, guilt, shame, whatever's going on. But that black space is kind of an equalizer that allows people to engage. So it was a technique that was mostly rooted in an emotional responsibility to the people that I was interviewing, to the audience, to myself, and really something that communicates the intentions of the film, which are history has happened, we're here now. It's very important to name and to give language to all of these experiences, and to take time to study what are these things that are unfinished? What are these feelings that are unfinished that we haven't felt? What do we name them? And then what are we going to do? Because it's too late to disband. It's too late for me, I feel. I think we cannot do apartheid's work for it, which is to remain separate. Ubuntu says we have to find a way to create relationships. And I think that our freedom, our true freedom and true liberation lies in figuring out what to do with these intimacies that people died for us to have. These bonds that people said, we must stop this thing of separating each other. We are now here together in this country. And the next phase of our freedom is about really using these relationships, these proximity that we have to each other, to figure out how to deal with our history. And that is very difficult work because it requires vulnerability. It requires non-posturing. It says, I can't use my usual defenses. I can't use my power and my victimhood as the thing that I really use. Or I can't use I have to see the thing that I don't want to see. I have to face myself. And that is extremely scary. And most of us do the best that we can to avoid it. We are very good at avoiding. And so Film 4 represents this It's a quagmire, really.
Mm,
That says, race. I don't believe racism is going to be resolved by Black people sitting alone together. Nor is it going to be resolved by white people sitting alone together. Like there have to be times where both of those groups do sit and talk alone, but then we have to create a third space where we find a language to engage
mm,
all over the world. And of course, this is the most difficult thing because it requires the feminine elements of our humanity, which
mm,
are vulnerability. And so
mm.
film four for me, that's the story of it.
Mm. And I've heard you say, or at least I've read something that you wrote in response to the film, where you said that the antidote to fascism is intimacy.
Yeah.
And that seems, just from what you're saying now, and we look at the time that we're in, you know, a time of genocide and prolonged humanitarian crises and wars, and I wonder if you could reflect on that, especially since now we find ourselves both living
In
in
the
the United
US, this is
States.
the day, Jonga. Yo,
Right? At a time like this, right, where the elements of fascism are almost regularly in display
they're
now.
here.
They're here.
They're here.
So, how do you look at the film's themes, and what do you hope people get out of it in the context that we're in today?
Well, the film comes out of many, many years of my trying to figure out who I am in the midst of our history as Black South African who only became a South African in 1994 because before that, when we had to write nationality, we had to write Transkeian.
Mm,
And so nobody told me what was happening in South Africa proper until 94 when we moved. And I was like, oh, what's going on here? And so my film and the story and the impetus to tell the story came from me trying to figure out who I am. And en route to figuring out who I am, I became very capital B Black
mm,
in the around Fees Must Fall. And after Mandela died, I read a lot. I really got baptized into that universal, immense library of knowledge that is, Blackness. And I was very proud of it. I was very happy. I became capital F feminist at the same time and moved around the world with this Black consciousness and this consciousness as an African feminist. And at some point, living in Johannesburg, during that time, I really fashioned my whole life to be like, this is what I'm about. I moved from where I was living in the suburbs and I moved to like Yeoville and started dating different people who were much more radical and like on the ground. And at some point, the negative side of that, there were many positive aspects. My career opened up. I started becoming more serious as a person, I felt. But there was the part of my humanity was struggling with also, hey, I'm very angry all the time about the world. I'm very angry all the time about everything. And I can problematize everything.
mm,
And I can feel myself just closing in on myself. And I got quite exasperated with my position, actually, and my positioning. And even the people that I'd befriended, I realized that we're all against something, we're all fighting against the same kind of systems. However, as people, we have different values, actually. When we get to know each other and when we're building friendships now along these things, you realize, oh, we actually aren't the same and we don't really believe the same things. And I remember there was a time when I left and I went back home to visit my grandmother to say, wait, I just need to get Joburg out of my mind and I need to be in another
mm,
space. And I realized, yes, I am Black in one way, on the other, when I'm in the Transkei, though, when I'm in the village, hey, I don't have to be Black.
mm,
There's no need to, I don't speak English. I am in a completely different worldview, in a completely different cultural context. There are rules there are laws, there are ways of being a person that are 2,000 years old.
mm,
2,000 years old. My family has never left that part of the world since we came down from wherever. They've been there for 2,000 years. So when I leave Joburg and enter the village, I become someone else. And I was like, wait, this is my base. This is my foundation. What is this thing? Why is it
mm,
that when we enter into a hut, there are silent protocols everywhere? Everybody knows what to do. There are places to sit. There are ways to cut a piece of meat. There are ways to take a piece of meat. There are ways
mm,
to greet. There are ways to fall asleep. There are ways to form a line around a wedding versus a funeral versus a graduation. There are
mm,
all these silent laws. I'm like, wait, this is another world. And this is this predates Blackness, this predates all of this stuff. And so I wanted to hold both of those things. And I became at some point very attached to learning and understanding what are these cultural values. Yini Ubuntu, like what is that thing actually? Where did it come from? And the sophistication that I discover every time I truly engage, when I read, when I have conversations, when oral history becomes my entry point into who I am. I was like, this is very important to preserve. And so the film is it embodies both the political Blackness, but also being umuntu, being abantu, and what that means, and how I hold both of those identities. And I feel like I have a place to go and rest, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, when the hybrid identity of being Western and African, when I get tired of it, or when I find no answers anymore within like the Western paradigm of existence. I know I have answers, and I can rest, and I know what to do with my say I'm feeling envious of something, of somebody. This other side doesn't tell me what to do with my jealousy. I'm just jealous, right? But at home, I can go to the village and find something there's a philosophy, there's a way in which to cleanse myself of that spirit. And what I'm hoping the film will do is to introduce that element, because this other one, for me, frees me from having to be Black only as a way of posturing my humanity. I can become umtu. I can become an umtu within that context of language, culture, all of it. There's a lot there. And what I'm hoping the film will do is to create a space for people's pain and histories to be reflected and held, but a doorway, an exit that goes, wait, there's something else that we are also. Because I find that obviously I'm in America, I'm in the East Coast, I'm in a blue state. My friends are liberals. And I do find that there's also a problem here on our side as liberals, huge problems that have also frozen us in our postures and made us very defensive as people, made us very impenetrable, made us very judgmental, made us very unwilling to engage difference, and made us do this thing where we are classing each other and saying people are stupid. As frustrating as some of the decisions people are making are, I don't like to call other people stupid. I don't think that there's a wisdom in that. I think there's a part of the problem that we're also holding. And I feel that we've all kind of lost the plot a little bit, and forgotten that we are human beings. And what does that mean? What does that mean that we're human beings? And it's difficult to enter into this space and this country right now and to say those kinds of things. So my posture has been to actually listen and to learn what are my surroundings? Who am I surrounded by? What is their culture? What is their upbringing? And I'm in Harlem, and I feel like this is one of the most beautiful, wonderfully cultural zones within this country and within the West. At the same time, it's also really the site for how Black people have been abandoned for generations. How people have been abandoned, actually, not just Black people, because whatever's happening to Black people in any situation, it's also happening to the other people at a deep foundational humanity level. It's also, they also are being robbed somewhere. Maybe they don't know that. But my posture has been, as much as I've wanted to speak and be online and say the things, for the first time, I'm an immigrant. And I'm an accidental immigrant because I just moved for love. And I didn't know that, oh my God, I'm going to be an immigrant. And in this time, we're being targeted. And we're the easiest targets. We are Black African immigrants. It's easy for the government now to go, please, we don't want you. And to cook up any reasons or to not give reasons, to say you're not welcome anymore. So for the first time, I'm having to restrict myself, not only because I'm listening, but also because there are implications now if I say something. And so I'm taking that as the universe and God's way of saying, Talapats, sit down, calm down and listen and figure out what is needed here, actually. And I think what is needed is the thing that we've been cooked in at home, that soup, Ubuntu, at the very basic level. We have to understand what Ubuntu is. We have to study what Ubuntu is, so that when we are speaking here, we're not only speaking from the experiences of being Black South Africans, but also from our experience as Abantu. What is it that
Mm,
we bring that this country doesn't have? What is it that transcends the political realm? And in relation to what's happening in Gaza, I mean, it is the most gaping, painful wound to engage
mm,
every day. And every day I sit and ask, what is it that I'm supposed to do? So in moments where I cannot engage online anymore, I pray, I patla, I write, I am thinking of the next world that is going to come. Because I feel also some of us have to be the activists. Some of us have to be on the streets. Some of us have to say the thing and to name the thing that needs to be named. And some of us have to think in the deep future and go, what is the next world? If we don't want this, what is it
mm,
that we want?
mm.
And someone has to do that job of imagining what kind of world do we want? And
Oh,
so, as an artist, as a storyteller, this is what I trouble myself by reading and engaging and asking and doing really work that looks like it might look like I'm not doing anything to somebody watching, but if we come from people who who love to sit, actually, and it might look
mm,
like we're not doing anything when we're sitting and talking, but there's
mm,
a lot of deep thinking, deep imagination when we're sitting and imagining what is it. It's much more difficult to think of what do you want versus what you don't want. It's easy to say
mm.
we don't want this. It's easy to say let's fight against this thing that we hate. Okay, what do you want to replace it with? And so
Exactly.
I'm doing that. I'm sitting and figuring out who do we become? What are we going to become after we've seen pregnant women beheaded and
Mm.
still having to give birth? Like doctors having to take a baby out of a pregnant, beheaded woman.
That's the one.
Who are we going to be after that? How do you refashion a humanity? How do you reposture peoplehood, personhood after that? When we're just allowed to see this thing on our phones. And that work is contemplative, it's quiet, and it's very difficult to do in a very noisy place like New York. But my husband built me a beautiful studio here. And it looks like we call it the Transkei because this is what my grandmother's house looks
Wow.
like on the outside. And so I'm I'm trying to find a quiet zone. I'm trying to
Uh-huh.
pray. I'm trying to locate myself and my ancestors on this land to say,
Mm,
okay, I've been sent here for a reason with this film and the
mm,
other messages that I have to try to figure that out. And mostly I'm scared because I feel like Americans don't engage at this level. But
wow.
here I am. The film knew that it wanted to come here. It's coming out on the 1st of
That's
October
true.
in this country. And so I'm following it as I've been following it. And it's that following that intuition
Mm,
and that wisdom of our people
mm,
that says it's okay. Um, they know why they've sent me here, so I'm being an obedient child, and
yeah.
we'll see what happens.
I do love that. In the very early parts of the film, you say, and I'm paraphrasing, that one's ancestors extend themselves through you. And you may not
Yes,
know what that reason is, but sometimes the clue is in the name.
it clues in your
Um,
name exactly,
yeah,
and
I
my
think
name
you.
is Milisuthando, and so I'm here, and I'm like, how do I cultivate love and make it stand?
Exactly.
How do I, as the bearer of love, where there is none? That's the name. So if you
Exactly.
go and you find that it's dark, how do you become that light? And it's scary, of course,
Mm-hmm.
because most of the time we've been laughed at by these people. We've never been taken seriously by these people. They
Mm,
feel like we are just always tracking behind them, trying to be like them. And it's like, no, babe, I've come here to your capital now. And I'm like, not trying to be like you, actually. And I'm trying to make you see that there's another way of
exactly.
being in the
Yep.
world. There's another way
Yeah.
of being a person where there's
Yeah.
harmony here with the earth and everything else. And there is going to come a time where you are looking towards me. And South Africans know this. South Africans
Mm,
know about there's
mm,
something that the black women have. And I'm not saying we're better than anyone or whatever, but
mm.
we haven't had our time for our wisdom to truly, truly, truly be normalized. And I'm
Yeah.
like, there's things to learn from us.
I Your film is definitely, I mean, it's traveled ahead of you and it's carving the path for you, but not you alone, for all of us. And so, we are out of time. But again, I thank you for bringing this to light and for sharing that wisdom of Black women and giving us permission to do the same, in the spaces that we occupy. So thank you again for this
Thank
incredible
you.
film.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I had a lot of extremely amazing support and help from my team for many, many years of women
Mm,
and actually, Asian women, white women who saw and understood and knew that they want to support this as also part of their role
mm.
in how to get out of our history and into something else. So I obviously I'm not alone. There were lots of people who helped, and I also want to shout out and thank them and the team that continues to hold me today as we, let the film out into the world. Thank you for this interview, and
uh,
thank you to the audience also for coming and joining us. And yeah, let this be our medicine. Actually, we said that when we were making the film, we said we're trying to make medicine for ourselves.
mm, mm. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.